I'd like to introduce very quickly the two panelists who will speak with us today about the work of Mouse and more generally the innovative work of ed tech here in New York City. Bre Pettis and Joanne Wilson, I'll let them introduce themselves.
So I'm Bre Pettis. Hello, Brooklyn.
There's no, come on, Brooklyn! All right.
So I'm CEO of Makerbot. We make Makerbots. We put them in the hands of kids at Mouse, and wonderful things happen.
That was nice, short, and sweet. I like that. I'm Joanne Wilson. I'm an angel investor in New York City. I'm a blogger under the name Gotham Gal and the co-chair of the Women's Entrepreneur Festival that's partners with ITP at NYU.
Yeah,
all right.
ITP.
Also, just so you see the connection, Joanne is the first board chair for Mouse ever, and she's been involved with Mouse from the beginning, which goes back now to 1997. We're a very proud child of Silicon Alley. And Bre, representing, with his 4-year-old company, representing another element of the future of tech here in New York City. We're proud to be partnered with Makerbot over the last couple of years.
There are some people in the audience who may not know what Mouse is yet. Let's break it on down.
Okay, thank you, Bre.
Nice call, Bre.
So, as you heard at the very beginning, Mouse, we've been around since '97. Our mission, we're a nonprofit. We're based here in New York City. We are, however, active in 11 states across the country and also in several other countries. Our mission is to not only bridge but close the digital divide, and we do that, as was spoken, by empowering underserved youth to learn, to lead, and to create, and I want to emphasize create, with the latest technologies. All right, so we're serving a population that typically gets the hand-me-downs of technology. They're the last in line to get the newest things. We now have, as a result of Mouse's work, we have 14 and 15-year-olds in some of the least served communities in this city or in Chicago, LA, large cities, who are now at the forefront. They're actually, for example, creating digital apps. They are, for example, working with 3D printers in their classrooms. And we're quite proud of that, and obviously, and maybe this is a segue to further conversation, what we are doing is helping to create the workforce of the 21st century. And when I go to visit with all of you, one of the things I hear over and over again is, I'm not sure where my talent is going to come from. Where's my workforce? Where am I going to get the people to work in my companies, in my startups? So maybe again, as a way to start, toss it over to Bre and to Joanne, thoughts you may have on how Mouse and groups like ours can help create the workforce in the 21st century.
How are we going to create the workforce in the 21st century?
We're going to teach them how to code. We're going to teach them STEM stuff. There should be more STEM curriculum being taught in the New York City public school system. There should be more art and music as well, which probably make for better students. But at the end of the day, we have a huge economic disconnect between the amount of jobs that we have in our companies and the amount of people that can fill them. And organizations like Mouse that are going into the public school system in high schools and junior high schools and basically giving those kids, a small group of them, the ability to be the IT people for those schools. We are giving them technology to turn them on, so with the hopes that they will continue onward in technology, go on to higher education, come back to our cities, and go to work in our companies or be their own entrepreneurs.
I was just in a Mouse school this last week, and...
Which one?
Which one was that?
Bre was at the Island School. It's on East Houston on the Lower East Side.
It's not served well by public transportation. But
that's an understatement.
But it was a room full of kids that were all actively working on projects. These are the kids that if you have an IT problem, you go to them. And they're like, yeah, I know how to do that. They were working on animation projects. They were working on 3D printing projects. They were coding games. It was a pretty amazing game I saw that was all done in Scratch. And they're actually getting, imagine being in middle school and being inspired by people who are actually doing things that were relevant. Imagine middle school is relevant. And that's one of the things that Mouse injects into school for these kids.
I agree. I was in a high school last Friday in a room with 6 kids that were on the Mouse squad. Which was very cool was that that squad is vertical, it's not horizontal. So there were kids that were 9th, 10th, and 11th grade in this particular group. Next year there'll be 12th graders. It's a new school, so they've only been open for 3 years. They taught everything with a laptop, so of course it was more about blended learning. But these kids knew that by giving them the ability to run the tech department basically in the school made them leaders in their own community, and they understood that that was their way out. That was their key to success. And what I really liked about these kids is you couldn't continue to go back to these kids and go, hey, my laptop broke again, or like, hey, you know that thing you fixed last week, can you come fix it again? They basically teach their peers how to fix their own problems, right? So internally, there are another arm of how they use technology and to push it out to all their peers as well.
One of the things that's cool about Mouse is that it works as an agent of change in the school. It doesn't it's not about like reforming school. It's this thing that's attached onto it, so it can actually do all the amazing stuff it does without a ton of bureaucracy. And I think it's neat. It's not necessarily about reforming school. It's about creating this thing around school that then changes because it's part of it.
Right. Unfortunately, that's the only way you can fix the New York City public school system, is that people need to come from outside to work inside in order to make the changes. Currently we're in, almost 100 schools in New York City. The truth is we should be in every single junior high school and every high school across the city. It should be mandatory that those schools hire kids within their school using a Mouse curriculum to have the Mouse Squad and have those kids run those schools. Those kids get engaged. As I said, they're leaders, and most of them do go on to higher education because they know that they know something that nobody else does, right? And they do understand that without technology, you're behind the 8 ball.
The other thing is that these kids get to interact with adults in school that are not their teachers. And it's like studies show that students in school who have a relationship with any adult in the school, any adult, do like massively better. So this gives them also somebody at school who's not jamming stuff down their throat, where they actually get to have a relationship with an adult that's not their teacher, not the principal, and not the detention person.
That's true.
Who gets to be a connection for them.
Right, that's true. I mean, so Mouse started, actually it was 16 years ago, but that's okay. We're having our 15th year anniversary tonight.
The end of the 15th year, can we say that?
That's right. It's the end of the 15th year. And we started in Washington Irving High School, where a group of people got together from the tech community and literally crawled through ceilings, making that building computer ready, right? I mean, there was no computers, and the unions were so pissed. They did not want us in those schools crawling through the ceilings, putting wires and computers in the school.
Typewriters or something? That was
no, I mean, it wasn't wireless. No. And then as we moved forward, schools became wireless, and so we tried a bunch of different things. Mouse Squad, which was the brainchild of Calvin Hastings, is the one that really stuck. Although certainly, like, they work with Makerbot, and there's other things that we did over the years that were sort of one-off, gaming things, or these girls were writing newspaper articles about what was happening in their particular life. So, to see where it's come until now is pretty exciting, but I will say, going back into the school system, that was kind of depressing, because as much as we've gone forward and how much we've affected now, 23,000 kids across the country, which affects 1.8 million children as being IT people. We still have regents, we still have this sort of rote memorization going on in these classrooms, and I'm not really sure how we break that.
I think one of the things that Mouse is an opportunity for is, if you're like me, I dropped out of middle school, ended up going back, becoming a teacher and all this kind of stuff. And now I look at school and I think, okay, it's so hard to think about how I could even have an impact on it. I'm just going to kind of serve you up something nice here. Let's say I get inspired, I'm here, I'm like, okay, I should really do something. What do people do to support Mouse? Just straight up.
And this is, by the way, not an advertisement.
Not scripted.
Not scripted, honest.
But really, like, people don't have many opportunities to actually have an impact. How do they do it?
No, thank you, Bre. So there's a variety of ways in which folks like yourselves can help the work that we do. There's time, there's talent, and there's treasure. And we'll start with the latter. Obviously, we are always in need of funding. I'll say that's a given. I mean, if you're in business, you always need funding too. We're happy for your dollars, but what we're most happy for is the brain power and the insights that you bring with your dollars. So we're looking for committed investors who can help us strategically, help us think through some of these issues. What kind of workforce do you need so that we can work with you, work with these school systems, or at least chip away at them to provide the workforce that you need. That also means we're looking for internships and mentorships. We have a lot of folks who get involved with us first by allowing some of our young people to work as interns in their companies. And I would love to talk to you about that. We have a real need for that. That's a good soft way to get involved with us, testing the cooking, as it were, on both sides. And likewise with mentorships. We are very, very eager to get individuals like yourselves in one-on-one or one-on-group situations with these young people. Again, these students we serve, here in New York City, 76% of them are eligible for free or reduced lunch. That is a government euphemism for the fact that they're poor, they are in the, quote, wrong zip code, they do not have access to space like this. It is imperative, I think Joanne was implying this, it is essentially a civil right for them to come and join the economy that we are building here together, and we need their brains. So, long story short, time, talent, and treasure. If you have any questions about that, please call me. I'll give you my card.
PayPal address?
I can give that to you too. If I may, and so advertisement over, we'll move on from that, and please do see us after if you're interested. I want to come back to the creativity piece. As Joanne was mentioning, and Bre is saying the same thing, we've inherited a 19th century school system that was designed for the industrial age. We in this country are now post-industrial. We're still saddled with a school system that hasn't changed. Creativity is the last thing that the schools are designed to encourage or foster. I am an artist myself, for example, and I've learned most of that on my own. They attempted to squelch that, in the second grade. I think what Mouse does, and this is through both our Mouse Squad in the problem solving that the youngsters have as part of the IT help desk, and not least on the 3D printing side, is fostering the kind of creativity that's absolutely essential for what everybody in this room does. We can't create the next economy without that kind of creativity. So I want to stress that for Mouse, it is as important to us to talk about creativity and actually to talk about failure. Here's the ugly truth, right? None of us who went through traditional schooling was encouraged to fail. In fact, failure was a bad thing. We don't believe that at Mouse. It's about failing quickly, failing better, and failing forward. This is familiar to all of you, right? This is a design process that's iterative, that's trying to solve real problems. That is inimical to the thinking of most traditional educators. So again, if you're interested, come work with us to help change the mindset and eventually the curriculum of the traditional school systems through a vehicle like Mouse.
The school I was in Friday, there's something that really stuck with me. So, unfortunately, the way that education has been set up back in the day, very structured, rote memorization, that worked, for years and years and years. And now, because of technology, more technology from outside, right? Kids have immediate access to everything. It's changed everything. And so these kids sit in a classroom and to hear a teacher, particularly in areas where they are, where there are more kids that are in need, to sit in front of a teacher just giving like rote memorization homework isn't working for these kids, right? You need to engage them in a different way. And so this school that I was in, they teach everything from the laptop, right? And there was this one kid there on Friday who had special needs. And he had read a book called The Fault in Our Stars, which happens to be a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And I saw it through the last 30% of the book. But anyway, he had taken a laptop and he had basically made a visual book presentation of this book with music that was chimed in, and it was his feelings about this book, right? And he was so proud of what he did, and I thought it was fantastic because, in essence, this was his book report, right? And the principal says to me afterwards, I said, that was awesome. She's like, and that kid will not pass his Regents. because that's not the kind of kid he is. That's not how his brain works, right? So what happens to those kids in the public city schools, if you don't pass the regents in the school you're in, they're gonna push you into a school where you can pass the regents, right? They're gonna like torture you until you can pass these regents. Doesn't mean you're gonna pass the regents. And you know what happens to those kids? They drop out. They drop out of the school system, and you can only imagine what the road is ahead of them, right? So hopefully programs like Mouse, and there's other ones that come into the system, are attempting to change the system from outside and bringing it inside. And unless we give this next generation technology, kids that don't have the privilege to have access to technology every day, we're going to find ourselves in even a worse situation as all of our companies grow, and we need people to work in our companies, people that code, people that understand technology, from a CMO to a CTO, if we don't spend time and resources to support organizations like Mouse that are basically helping these kids compete with the privileged.
I'll give another quick example along those lines. One of, and these are anecdotal, but I think they speak volumes. I was about 2 weeks ago in one of our schools, and it's a school that directly abuts public housing. This young man looks at me, he's about 14, his native language is Spanish, he's learning his English on the school bench, and he said, the streets around here just aren't very clean. And he said, and he effectively said, I'm not going to wait for government, by the way. And so he was creating, we use a variety of Lego robotic type kits, and he was creating a robot that looks something like a crab, actually, scuttling around to, like a Roomba, basically, to clean the sidewalks around his apartment building. And I just thought to myself, this is a complete triple win. He's not relying on government, despite all the stereotypes about people who live, those people who live in the quote projects. No, he said, I'm not waiting for some outside body. I'm going to do this myself. And he says, by the way, it isn't really fair that our streets are really dirty, but I'll find a solution. And he was tinkering away, and he had other people working. And eventually, we'll get the 3D printers, and we'll have a whole new line. The other thing that really struck me, and this is to both Joanne and Bre's point about the power of Mouse, is leadership. Because I was watching, his name was Guillermo, and I was watching Guillermo at age 14, clearly a captain of industry in the making. He was getting several of his colleagues and buddies to work together. He was creating a little company on the floor to make this happen around a common vision. And that is something you don't see when you're sitting in little rows and you are individually taking a test. In fact, if you do that, it's what we call collaboration all too often is called cheating in the more traditional setting. I'm not saying you shouldn't do your own work, but again, you don't have the opportunity to do what he was doing, and it had real purpose. That's the kind of thing that we would hope would inspire some of you. When I say I'm always looking for money, but again, I'm really looking for your heart and your mind to follow with that. It's your heart that matters here. I think we're at that point. We have about 7 minutes to go, and I was just wondering at this point if there are any questions that we might... Oh, a plant in the audience.
I'm sorry, I don't know mics, but what does the next 15 years look like for Mouse? What do you see coming up?
So the question is, and it's from a friend but not a plant, what does the next 15 years look like at Mouse? I think what we're going to do at Mouse is 2 or 3 things. One, we are going to definitely continue to expand geographically. My basic mantra to the board is more Mouse. First and foremost, more Mouse here in New York City. As Joanne quite rightly says, we need to be, if not in every school in New York City, certainly in the majority. So geographic expansion is clearly on the horizon. But I would say just as important is an expansion in our curricular offerings. Part of what we're doing now is looking over the hill and around the corner at the next new thing. We were fortunate, you might say, in connecting with Bre on the 3D printing. I'm saying to myself, what about wearable computing? Wouldn't it be interesting to find out what's going on with pervasive computing in clothing, or drone technology, civilian drone technology? In other words, constantly adding, as others catch up on 3D printing, perhaps, so we're constantly looking at the new technologies. Undergirding all of this, it's coding, it's programming. Digital is now pervasive, so I guess the third leg would be, given that digital is now pervasive, how do we begin to think about more traditional subjects that have now become infused with digital? So what does the teaching of the arts look like in 2020 or 2025, given that, in fact, digital tools will be used by everybody? Is there thoughts you might have about as stakeholders in Mouse?
I think that
How's Makerbot being?
So Don's question is, how is Makerbots going to be used by the next generation of mouse folks? And I think that kind of answers the same question of what happens next. You know, for us at Makerbot, I'm a former public school teacher, taught 7 years in Seattle Public. And so teaching, our mission is to empower people to be creative and give people tools to explore the future of creativity. And so for us, a big chunk of that is what will young people do with 3D printing? And it turns out that, you know, usually what happens is they ask, can it make Lego? And you say yes, and they're like, just get out of my way. Or they're like, can I print my Minecraft stuff? And I'm like, you don't know about Printcraft? And they're like, okay, here we go. And then it starts to get, you know, what's cool about one of the things that Mouse does is that most, if not all, of the projects that the students do have a social justice or a component to them of doing good in the world. And so, you know, there's like, you know, they're making video games that build awareness on the disappearing elephant population. They you know, with 3D printing with their Makerbot, they made a bunch of 9/11 memorials that were 3D printed memorials for that. And they showed those at Maker Faire last year. So it's real participatory stuff. It's not just like, I'm going to draw a house. It's like, you know, they're empowered to actually do things that have an impact on the world. And I think that that's something that so often, I mean, we're kind of characterizing school, and unfortunately, the stereotypes of school as not being relevant end up being really oftentimes true. But by having this mouse attached to it, adding this relevancy of being able to do something that's actually relevant to your future, that's like a skill that you can use, like it's a leg up. Like kids who use Makerbots are going to be more ready for the future in the same way that, you know, I was starting to use my family got a computer in '81, and I was that, you know, and that was at the point where everybody was like, you know, I don't need a computer, I've got a pocket calculator. So like we're kind of at that same stage of what happens next, and the next generation. If you think about like what would you have done if you'd had access to a factory at age, you know, 10, 11, 15, 17, you go, okay, that's interesting, and now it's actually possible. So it's. You know, we're developing curriculum. You can go to curriculum.makerbot.com. Actually, Mouse is doing super interesting stuff with Makerbots. And we're just going to continue to build that partnership so that you know, we can have an impact where it's most powerful and then also makes us most happy in terms of like why we do what we do.
I think the other thing that I want to see happen at Mouse over the next 15 years is, you know, when Mouse started, the tech industry in New York City was not that big. And it was really the nonprofit of the industry, right? I mean, the second year we had an event at the Armory, we raised $1 million that night. And it was unbelievable, but there was not, everyone in that room was probably the entire tech industry, right? And so, you know, what was powerful about that, and really before its time, is that we raised money from the private to fund us to do public things. And by doing that, it allowed that organization to be here now 15 years later, and most of our money now comes from the public, right? And so, you know, regardless of building a better website and more shared curriculum among teachers or shared curriculum among kids from a private school to Compton to Detroit that they can get online and talk to each other because the world is becoming flatter, I think that it would be really important to see tech communities across this country embrace Mouse as their nonprofit on record, because Mouse is the one that are going into these public schools and giving technology and opportunities to kids that would not necessarily see or grab or work with those opportunities. This is our next workforce, right? And so if we can't fix that public school system from outside with the ability to touch and feel and work with Makerbot and have computers and think outside the box in a public school system, 15 years from now, if we don't do something about that, we're going to be in big trouble. And so, you know, if you're from New York, if you're from DC, if you're from Boston, you're Chicago, you're from Detroit, you're from Cincinnati, wherever you're from, you know, today or where you're going and where all these tech communities are starting to boil up, you know, you should be contacting Mouse and getting him in that public school system because it's going to create for a better economy in that area of the world, of the country, that's going to spread across this country. And the tech community, in everything that we're doing, we are the economy that is going forward. We are the industry that needs jobs to be filled, and there's not enough people to fill them.
And that is perfect timing. The last word goes to Joanne as our founding board chair. We're at exactly 0 minutes.
Fantastic.
So we thank you. That's your pitch. Thank you very much.